It's been nearly 48 hours since an individual drove a vehicle into a crowd of revelers at Berlin's main Pride event. The alleged attacker is now dead, shot by police as he charged them allegedly with a knife. But the investigations continue and the questions and trauma from this attack are just becoming known. In today's live stream, we'll try and address some of them. And as always, your questions, the chat is open on YouTube and TikTok. Send us your questions and comments. We'll try and bring them into the conversation. I'll be talking to our correspondent and later a terrorism expert as well. But first, this is what Berlin's iconic Brandenburg Gate looked like last night, drenched in rainbow colors with a message reading, Berlin, City of Freedom. People showed up to pay tribute to the victims of this attack. One person was killed and 29 injured. I remember Brandenburg Gate is right next to the site of this attack when this went down on Saturday around 10 p.m. local time. Let's get more from DW political correspondent Giulia Saudelli, who's been monitoring the story. Giulia, the alleged attacker Abdul B, and we're calling him Abdul B following the German press code, he was apparently killed yesterday as he charged at police with a knife. Do we know anything more about the circumstances of that event and how police ended up in the northwest of the city at an allotment?
Yes, so the whole city was on high alert throughout all of Sunday because everyone was aware that the man was on the run and no one really knew where he might be, whether he was still in the city, whether he might have left. So the whole city was on high alert. And in the end, he was found in possibly an unlikely place. It's a community garden. There are many of those across the city, across Germany, on the outskirts of the city. And these are usually very tranquil places where people tend to their gardens and have little huts where they spend their weekends. And this garden, that's where reportedly the father of Abdul B had an allotment and where the man had sought refuge. And that's where the police showed up yesterday afternoon, and people in the area reported hearing shots fired around 6 p.m. Yesterday Berlin time, and reportedly the Abdul B lunged towards the police forces, brandishing a knife, and that's when the police forces then ended up shooting him, and he ended up dying after the shootout.
I mean, it must be said, Giulia, that police named him within the initial hours of this attack happening. They already had a name and his picture that was publicized. So the police had their eye on him. He was known to authorities, correct?
He was definitely known to authorities. He had been sentenced to prison time before, over almost 2 years of prison time. Then he was released on probation. And he was known as a radicalized Islamist. So definitely he was known to authorities, and they were quick to track down the fact that he had been the one driving the white van that rammed into the crowds on Saturday night. But it took quite some time before they managed to locate him after he had fled the scene. Now, this could have gone on even longer if we look at the past in 2016. When there was the terror attack at Breitscheidplatz here in Berlin, when a truck ran into a Christmas market. It took days before the suspect there was found abroad in Italy. So this actually concluded within 24 hours, and police authorities are calling this a success for them.
Can you elaborate a bit more about the conviction that he had? Because as we understand, Abdul B had apparently tried to join Islamic State. He was convicted and sentenced in Lebanon, then also in Germany. But he wasn't in prison. He was out. How did that come to be?
Yes, exactly. So he had traveled to Lebanon and he had tried to find contacts that could bring him to Syria so that he could join the Islamic State there. And he was arrested and jailed in Lebanon. And once he was released there, he was a German citizen, but with family roots in Lebanon. He then flew back to Germany and was arrested on arrival at the airport in Berlin. And after that, he was sentenced to 1 year and 10 months in prison, but he was then released on parole. And after this release, the prosecutor's office had appealed the sentencing. They wanted a tougher sentence for him. And in the meantime, after he was released, he was enrolled in a de-radicalization program, which he had started attending. This was going to be a long-term commitment for him. So in the meantime, he was free to move around Berlin.
You were talking about him being part of a de-radicalization program. Where are we at the moment with the status of the investigation into this case? I'm sure there are a number of questions that are being asked. So what are the elements and the points of inquiry that the police are looking at the moment?
Well, there are definitely still a lot of open questions behind the direct motives of this attack, whether he had any accomplices. There have been reports of possibly other people having fled the scene and that he might have been supported by others, whether he was part of a group or whether he was acting alone, and whether he had any external support in carrying out this attack. So these are all open questions, but a lot also of the focus is now shifting on whether this could have been prevented, whether Germany's measures in countering extremism and dealing with known Islamists who pose a risk and who are likely to commit an attack like this, whether Germany has the right tools to deal with them and prevent these attacks from happening.
I'm glad you bring this up because I did want to ask you, I mean, has there been, is any political pressure building on the government to potentially strengthen laws and to try and deal with situations such as these before they turn adverse as they did in this case?
This is exactly what we are hearing both from terrorism experts but also from some politicians. Some terrorism experts are saying that they see Germany's criminal law as too mild, also compared to other European countries like France or England or the UK. And so this is something that is coming up again and again in statements coming from experts saying that the judicial system doesn't really have the tools to keep these people who are known as extremists under control, for example, keeping them in jail. There is also the issue of juvenile criminal law in Germany, which is a separate entity, basically, a separate issue, and some people are asking to reconsider this. And others are also saying that maybe the problem is not necessarily the criminal laws itself, but how they are applied by judges, that maybe the interpretation of these laws is too lenient. So there are calls to look at actually the tools that authorities have here in Germany to be able to better prevent attacks like these.
Giulia, we're talking about the response of the authorities, what they should be doing. I wanted to bring in a question that's been raised in the community on the chat on YouTube by a user at Flynn4557. I mean, I'll ask you the question. You can tell me if you have the answer to this or not. But the user is raising the question of whether the police have cameras in Berlin, and also saying he or she doesn't understand why police are not more careful in these situations. Did they really have to shoot and kill? This is, of course, we're talking about the situation last evening with Abdul B when he was shot dead. As police say, he allegedly charged them with a knife. Do we know more about the circumstances on this?
We don't know the details of what happened there on the scene. We just know what the authorities have reported. But usually when this is the case, there have been cases before of attackers that have been apprehended and they were caught alive. So I would imagine that the police officers who were there on the ground shot because they were being attacked. There is also an interest for investigators to actually hear directly from the suspected attacker to try to understand their motives and maybe hopefully learn from what has occurred. But we do not know the details there and what happened. And in terms of overall security, yes, there are cameras in Berlin, possibly not as many as in some other countries like the United States or in the UK. And there was a strong police presence around the Christopher Street Day, so the Pride Parade in Berlin on Saturday. But the area where the attack occurred is a park, basically an open park. It is very broad, and this was towards the end of the event, and it was outside the main area where the event was happening. So, yeah, clearly that specific area was not really protected enough.
I mean, there's comments coming in, like, for example, from user Kramb Bikuroneko. I'm sure I mispronounced this. My apologies. Talking about this person, Abdul B, in this instance, having a personal responsibility, but then Berlin communities needing to do a better job of helping young people. It wasn't really directed at you. Just one question I have, one final question for you, Giulia. We were talking about the political reactions to this attack and the pressure that is building on the government. Both German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier have called this an attack on society, on our society. Is that the main message that the political establishment wants to put across at this stage, given the severity of this attack?
This seems to be one of the strongest messages that is being put out right now. We've heard it now more than once coming from the Chancellor Friedrich Merz, saying that the government will do everything to prevent what has occurred from happening again, calling on people rallying together to show unity in the face of what has happened. But he also did mention that it is now time to consider whether there were gaps in the security measures. And we've heard that also from the Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, who is responsible for internal domestic security in Germany. And he said that he finds it peculiar that this person, the suspect Abdul B, was at home, free, not in prison, after it was known that he had committed a large number of crimes, that where his sympathies lay. So on the one hand, yes, calling for solidarity and support, but also starting to look into might have really gone wrong here.
Giulia Saudelli, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks so much for bringing us that update. I'd like to introduce my next guest now. Hans-Jakob Schindler is Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project. It's a non-profit that helps combating the threat from extremist ideologies. Hans, very good to see you. You know, I had a separate opening question prepared, but I just want to bring you what a user at Valor8324 is asking on YouTube, on our chat, Hans. This user is asking, why is someone allowed to walk free while attending a de-radicalization program? How is that even possible? What would your answer to this user be?
Well, thanks for having me. Now, first of all, we need to look at the details, and we don't know them yet, of what brought the judiciary to the decision to actually release him from jail. There has to be a security assessment before anyone who is a violent criminal is released, and what was the arguments that they brought there. Now, a de-radicalization program, as a matter of principle or generally, is not just conducted in prison. It is also for individuals who are outside of the prison. In fact, if you look at programs around the world, de-radicalization programs work best if the other side, i.e. the person who's supposed to be de-radicalizing, is voluntarily taking part. If the person, as it was very likely the case here, is a hardened, absolutely convinced and super motivated is extremist or terrorist, de-radicalization programs are not very effective. So they're either effective at the very beginning of a radicalization process, where the ideological reprogramming that is a radicalization is not yet that strong, or at the very end for individuals who actually want to exit the extremist scene. That's sometimes also called exit programs. When you have a super motivated individual, it's really, really hard to actually get them off that path.
I mean, you have experience with this because that is what your NGO, the NGO that you work for, does. But I mean, pardon me if it's a stupid question. I mean, do these de-radicalization programs really have an impact on individuals who are placed in them, given the record of this person that is so far known to the public? A person who wanted to join Islamic State, was committed to doing so, was punished for it in Lebanon, then also came here to Germany, was punished for it equally. I don't know, maybe it's not too much information, but then Do de-radicalization programs work with individuals like that? Or the question of them being at liberty in society should be answered differently?
Yeah, I mean, just to be very clear, my organization doesn't run de-radicalization programs. We look and evaluate them rather than actually doing them themselves. However, it is clear, and it's been proven in de-radicalization programs, not just in Germany, but also in other parts of the world and in other cultures as well, including de-radicalization programs in Islamic countries, where you would think, especially when we talk about Islamist extremism, they would be effective, if the individual has no motivation at all to actually leave the path of terrorism and extremism. That is not going to work. Very rarely can you get a super motivated terrorist off that path. So there has to be a combination of repressive measures that hopefully in the end makes the individual think whether this is the right path, and an offer of an alternative way to conduct your life. If there's no motivation, and in this case, as far as I understand from media reporting and statements of the organization who talked to him, there was no motivation whatsoever to take part.
Okay, I didn't mean that your organization runs de-radicalization programs. I'm just saying that your organization is one that tracks a lot of what is happening, especially here in Germany, but not just in Germany. But in specific, in relation to Germany, can you tell us, has there been an increase in the number of people on such de-radicalization programs in recent years? Is that something that is happening? And also another reason why I'm asking you this is perhaps Germany has had this record of attacks in recent years. I mean, thinking of the knife attacks in Mannheim and Solingen in 2024, which had some sort of Islamist ideology behind there, it appears from the public point of view that there seems to be an increase in these kinds of attacks. And hence the question, are more people part of these de-radicalization programs, or at least being observed by the security agencies?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are several aspects to consider here. Number one, we are in a very specific point in time where Europe and Germany is surrounded by quite horrible conflicts that all, of course, in a social media environment, immediately also have an effect on the security situation in Germany, from the war against Ukraine to the war against the Middle East, the war against the Islamic regime in Iran, as well as the massive growth of ISIL and Al-Qaeda in sub-Saharan Africa. All of this, of course, radicalizes particular groups within Germany. So it's no surprise, of course, that the numbers keep rising. Also, of course, fueled by the way that social media is organized technologically, that really enhances any divisions within society. Now, of course, part of the increase that you can see in the statistics of individuals are deemed to be part of a extremist milieu, whether it's Islamist, as it was in this case, or right-wing or left-wing, is also because our instruments to monitor and detect extremists have become better. So we see more people that are extremists because we have learned how to detect that better. Now, the big question here is, and whenever there's a terror attack, something has gone wrong by definition. The system is set up to prevent terror attacks, not to allow them from happening. Now, here we have to see whether it was primarily judiciary, it may be the assessment of the de-radicalization specialist wasn't given the right indications of the security forces. Did the security forces react appropriately? Should they had been given a tip-off that the individual had actually talked about specifically attacking the CSD in Berlin? We don't know enough details yet to say it's all three, it's one particular problem, but certainly, as with any terror attack, the most important thing here is to learn from what went wrong, and that means we have to be quite brutal in analyzing the mistakes.
A question from a user here, goes with the name I'm Just Good Looking, asking what is the underlying ideological motivation for these attacks? I wonder if there is one answer to it. Maybe there's a combination. I'll leave it to you how you want to answer that.
I mean, in this specific case, obviously there's always a terror attack. There could be various ideological motivations, whether it's a left-wing extremist terrorist terror attack or right-wing extremist. But in this particular case, of course, the individual was very close and potentially maybe even a member of the Islamic State, which means we have the hardest, most extremist misinterpretation of Islam possible in the world. And with all extremism, including Islamist extremism, this is never about just yourself. All extremist milieus always have a call to action, either by peaceful means, if we talk about what it's called in Germany, legalistic Islamism, i.e. change and destroy the political system and the free democratic society by non-violent means, or in the case of terrorist Islamism, by violent means. And here in IS, of course, there is a range of natural priority enemies. The Western lifestyle as at the very top. Now, the queer LGBTQ plus community is a symbol for these guys, for a free, open, and Western society, and therefore very, very high on the list of symbolic targets to attack.
I'm glad you've brought this up, because I did want to ask you, because at least here in Germany, in the recent past, that the attacks that we have seen haven't particularly targeted the LGBTQ plus community. Do you think that this was an attack particularly directed at the LGBTQ plus community? Because if it is indeed the case, at least what it looks like right now, I know we're in a very preliminary stage, would you think that this is a turning point in the way Islamist terrorism is operating in Germany?
Well, sadly, it's not really the very first attack, even when we talk about very serious attacks. In 2020 in Dresden, an Islamist, inspired by IS, knifed down a gay couple. In 2022, another Islamist terrorist beat a trans person to death at the CSD march in Munich. And of course, there is quite an elevated level of day-to-day violence, beatings, shoving, insults, not just from the right-wing extremist scene, but also from the Islamist scene. So this is unfortunately never really stopped. And of course, this is the biggest Pride March, not only in Germany, but one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in Europe. This was a very symbolic event. And it's unfortunately not so much of a surprise that in addition to all the hate that the CSD organizers have to endure from the violence-oriented right-wing extremist milieu, that here the Islamist milieu also saw this as or particularly this perpetrator, as an opportunity to do a very symbolic terror attack that grants him maximum media attention, which is the point of all forms of terrorism. Terrorism doesn't work without attention to what has happened.
Okay, can you talk to us a bit about how authorities are dealing with this? I mean, how alert are authorities to the threat to the LGBTQ plus community or other communities, particularly in the kind of environment that Germany and the rest of Europe finds itself in? How alert are authorities in Germany to the rising radicalization online and the potential of attacks?
Look, I mean, you saw the actual security precautions that were done for the parade, as well as, of course, for the final event. And in a way, sadly, you could argue the security precautions for the actual event were quite successful, because the terrorist did attack people going to the event rather than the actual event. I.e., the physical barriers seem to have deterred him from attempting to drive on the big street that leads to the Brandenburg Gate, which of course would have afforded him even more media attention, because there were live cameras there. So, of course, there is an alertness. There is alertness that especially the LGBTQ plus community has constant threats from right-wing extremists, but also from Islamist extremists. In this particular case, multiple points of defense seem to have had some odd decision-making. And it's now really important to look at what was going on in the judiciary, what was going on with the de-radicalization specialist, what was the reaction or non-reaction of the police and security forces in Berlin to the current situation and the history of the individual. Clearly, if the individual is released from custody by the judiciary, the security forces cannot just arrest the individual again just because he may be dangerous. You have to have actual proper cause to do so. But if there was a tip-off that he intends potentially to attack the CSD, as soon as he gets in the car, why not stop the car and do a traffic control just to warn him or to extend the traffic control to the time until the event is over, so he's not able to do harm.
I mean, you're talking about this sort of soul searching, but you had that in 2016 as well, 10 years back, right? When the terror attack on the Breitscheidplatz Christmas market in the heart of Berlin. Even then, there were questions asked as to this person who was apparently on the radar of authorities and who was eventually caught in Italy. And there was, I think, a shootout with police, if I remember. Even then, questions were being raised about how this person was roaming free when he shouldn't have been in the country. 10 years later, we're asking similar questions about, well, where did the authorities fail here? Are lessons not being learned at the official level, or the problem is too widespread with too many loops and too many holes and gaps to fill in?
Look, I mean, no system can ever be perfect, right? Obviously, there have been lessons learned after 2016. Because you saw that there are much more physical barriers now on any public event than there were there. There is a much better sharing of information between the security forces on the federal as well as the state level than there was before. But of course, things tend to go wrong every once in a while, and you have to learn because the other side is also adjusting to the situation.
Do you think it is unfair? I mean, I've been asking you these questions, and I think people in our community have also been asking this question. Is it an unfair question to ask that police and the authorities are potentially not filling in those gaps and people are getting through and the result is these kind of attacks? Is that a fair question to ask, or are we...
No, because the effort of the other side is relentless, right? I mean, there is far more terror attacks that get prevented in Germany than the ones that are actually happening. But the other side is relentless. Every day they're trying to motivate individuals to attack. There is a lot of propaganda going out. I think even with you, we discussed in the past how social media platforms are not fulfilling their responsibility to cooperate with security forces and remove that harmful content, which leaves people to radicalize and to potentially become violent extremists. So there are many aspects to this. Of course, the system is much better than it was in 2016. It, however, can never be perfect because the situation keeps evolving.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project. Thanks so much for making the time for us.
Thank you so much.
A lot of you have also been writing in on TikTok. I just wanted to bring up one comment from the user Ella. She writes in German, "Mein tiefstes Beileid an alle Betroffenen." That basically means her deepest sympathies to all the victims. We're talking about one person who died and 29 others injured. Hannah on TikTok making the comment that Germany has become unsafe. I mean, that's definitely a feeling that one sees on the community chat. Another user, Mono Must Die. It's an unusual username, but well, that's the username, saying on TikTok that it's obvious that this person got radicalized and it had nothing to do with where his roots lie. Just some comments I wanted to bring across to you guys. At Nietzsche Code asking on YouTube if there were any news on accomplices. At the moment, there doesn't appear to be any news on accomplices, but of course, police investigations are continuing. And it is a regular update on those investigations. As they proceed, we will bring you on DW, whether it's on our website, dw.com, or across all our social media platforms, including here on YouTube and TikTok. Updates also on TV. We leave this live stream here for the time being. Thanks to all of you who joined in and sent us your questions, comments, and concerns. We'll be on this story, and there'll be regular updates across the entire DW universe. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.